Good evening and welcome to the Highlands Biological Foundation's 2020 Zahner Conservation Lecture Series. As with many things, this year looks a little different, so we appreciate you joining us in this new format. My name is Paige Engelbrechtson and I am the Nature Center Education Specialist. Together with Winter Gary, who is not pictured for you all currently, we are running this abbreviated series. So we work for the Highlands Biological Foundation, which supports research and education in the Southern Appalachians through programs like the Zahner Conservation Lecture Series. This actually began in the 1930s and focuses on natural history and conservation. Our series is short not only in number, we're only running 3 this year instead of our normal 10, but also in time. So our speaker is going to present for 10 to 15 minutes, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. And then we're going to take an additional 10 to 15 minutes for questions. So if you all have questions, please drop them in the Q&A or the chat where we all can see them. Today's lecture, you may notice, is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube page, where you can also find videos of the earlier Zahner lectures, as well as all of our other Foundation virtual programming. I am pleased to introduce our speaker for tonight. Mark Hopey is a field biologist. He has worked with various bird-related projects in Washington State, New Jersey, and North Carolina for the past 25 years. He currently directs programming for the Blue Ridge Bird Observatory. Mark's talk tonight will focus on bird banding research in the Southern Appalachians, particularly the long-term monitoring avian productivity survey that the Foundation is funding here at the station. So, Mark, would you like to kick things off?
Hi, everybody. Mark Hopey here. Thanks for joining us. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to share with you all. Are we okay there? Everybody can see that, I hope. We're good? Great. Excellent. So, as I said, I wanted to thank everybody for joining and for the opportunity to work with Highlands Biological Foundation and the Highlands Biological Station. We are Southern Appalachian Raptor Research, which is an unaffiliated wildlife organization where it's more like a club than anything. We're unaffiliated with universities, we're non-governmental, and we also basically we formed our nonprofit to raise money. So that we can, our mission being protection and conservation of wild birds and their prey and birds of prey in their habitat in the Southern Appalachians. And we do that through monitoring, education, and basic field research. Well, it just so happens that we're changing our name this year to the Blue Ridge Bird Observatory, which is kind of a global trend. And it's a way of kind of joining a tribe of people that are concerned about the environment through looking at birds, and birds being environmental harbingers of the condition of our greater environment, really. So you can reach us through the Big Ball Banding Station. We operate this Big Ball Banding Station, so we use the moniker bigballbanding.org for our website, and they won't be changing, and we also have a Facebook page where you can get in touch. Some of the projects that we operate or run during the year, we run 4 map stations, 3 at lower altitudes, or I guess we can consider Highlands now kind of a middle altitude. Big Bald is in Madison County, Cowie Mound and Katua are run with the help of the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indians, their natural resources projects. And of course, the Highlands Foundation or Biological Foundation has started here. We've operated those other map stations for a number of years and have some good experience and data. We also run the Big Bald Bird Migration Project, which is starting now up at Big Bald Mountain, which is in Madison County, just north of Asheville, about 45 minutes to an hour. There we do hawk counting, raptor banding. We also work with threatened species in North Carolina, such as the northern saw-whet owl, which is the smallest owl in North Carolina and also east of the Mississippi. We also run a project called the Carolina Kestrel, the Carolina Kestrel Partners, which engages private landowners. We're also, part of our mission is education. We've run summer education programs at Vacation Bird School for about 10 years. Again, our Carolina Kestrel Partners, which includes nest boxes where we monitor and band nestling birds to look at their survivorship and how well they're fledging and being recruited into population. And then we also, again, work with this saw-whet owl. Let me back that up because that is a nice photo. So anyway, it takes a lot of work, most of the people that work with us, we have no full-time staff and it's volunteer. And interacting with the public and doing education is a big part of it, part of our mission. But we're here to talk about the beautiful Highlands Biological Station, Lake Linden, correct? I think that's right. At any rate, the habitat here, we've been invited here to work. It's kind of the brainstorm of Jason Love, and I knew Jason when he worked at Coweta. And the reason we're working with the MAPS program is, of course, we know, and you know, that birds are in decline. They've been slowly disappearing from view for many decades. It's nothing new. It's been predicted and forecast by numerous authors and classic books and writings, and now we're very aware that things are ramping up through the decades. And just this past year, I'm sure all of you caught your attention through many researchers. It was published in Science. I'm going to move this a little bit so we can take a look here. And basically that birds have been, their populations have diminished by about 29 to 30% as far as an overall population of all North American birds. And that adds up to a whopping 2.9 billion birds in North America alone. This chart is right out of the report, and basically the blocks that you see, and I didn't put a graphic in there, but the blocks were a baseline study or baseline data that was collected since 1970. And you can see that those colors have receded from where the blocks are, and that is the top block actually represents that 29% that is now missing. And that's across the board. We're talking about birds. We're not talking about just this charismatic birds like eagles, or which are doing very well, or the saw-whet owl that disappeared there. These are birds that, for various reasons, whether it's habitat loss or climate change, they are all somehow being counted less and are no longer with us. And I say counted less because this is where the baseline data comes from. So North American Breeding Bird Survey is the largest data set, a very robust data set that started in the 1960s by scientists with the USGS. It still operates and is conducted by volunteers. The counts are done early in the nesting season when adult birds are singing, and it's a road-based transect, basically point count. So you drive along the road and you stop every half a mile and you listen for birds and you write down the number that you hear and try to identify those. And so it takes some skills to do that. That data has been collected, like I said, for the last, over close to 60 years now. And it produces maps like this, for instance, this distribution map. We have other ways now that we're collecting data, of course, things like eBird, some of you may know. You're entering your bird lists electronically, and they also help with distribution or range maps. The Breeding Bird Survey, though, has supplied a baseline from 1970, and then a lot of the more modern count methods, such as eBird, such as radar data that has been finely tuned, that now picks up large movements of birds. It allows us to compare the numbers of birds from 1970 until now. And so, for instance, this northern Parula warbler, you can see that the red shows us that that trend for this bird in our area is actually right in the southern Appalachians of North Carolina in the mountains. It's in decline by at least 1.5%. So, excuse me. The Institute of Bird Populations is the group that we're affiliated with, or actually following their protocols to do this study at Highlands Biological Station. The Institute for Bird Populations was started also back in the 1980s, and they took a look at these declines and they knew they were happening, and so they decided to apply methods that have been used actually in Europe for many decades, and apply those methods here to take a closer look at bird population health. Instead of just enumerating birds and are we seeing more or are we seeing less, they wanted to take a look and try to understand why these birds are in decline. And to do that, they had to look closely at the birds while they were breeding here in North America. And they've actually expanded into Central and South America, where this hooded warbler actually goes during the winter. They're using standardized, as it says, mist netting and banding programs to complement these count-based monitoring. So what that's doing is it's giving us what the Institute for Bird Populations calls vital rates, and what ecologists would call demographics, or demographics, basically the birth rates or the death rates, or the how many birds come and go from a certain area. We're collecting all of that data from about an 8 to 20 acre area in and around the Highlands Biological Station. And that data is combined with many other mist net stations or map stations monitoring avian productivity, which of course relates to how well the birds reproduce. And then survivorship, meaning that we need to recapture these birds to know they've survived. So our data is now part of these pins that you see on the map right here. And we are going to be adding into this data to make very powerful models to try to understand trends in populations. This is the method we use. It's a standard collection method for mist nets, and using mist nets. Mist nets being this type of net that you actually can't see. If you haven't seen this before, it does look kind of disturbing to us, and I'm sure it's actually more disturbing for the birds because they don't usually end up in this sort of position. we usually see them like this. And I throw this in because the mist nets can be very dangerous if not handled properly. So we have trained staff on hand that have lots of experience. It takes a lot of patience. It's not for the faint of heart, because you think, oh, this bird is really hurt, but it's actually doing okay. We think of it as a kind of a sticky hammock that they're in, and even though the nets actually aren't sticky. But this is a standard method for actually handling birds and actually capturing them safely. They're transported in these very expensive transport vehicles. It does look like they're brown bags, and I know this is not a picture of my lunch that I left. This is actually the way we handle these birds, because it's a dark, warm container that actually the birds can breathe in, and we actually are able to write data on the outside of the bag that we need. And the data is probably the most important part of this whole operation, other than the bird themselves. The goal is to individualize each bird by placing a metal band that's supplied by the USGS. So this is your tax dollars at work. And this band costs really a tiny fraction of a penny, I'm sure, but each one is uniquely numbered, and it's placed on the bird's leg, depending on the size of the leg and everything, depending on the species of the bird. And each one has a number, a 9-digit number. This bird banding, this marking of birds in this manner, has been going on for over 100 years now, just in the United States. And it's, again, governed and regulated by the US government. It's used in many different ways, and the MAPS program uses it. As you saw, they've banded well over 2 million birds already. When the birds are actually a band put on their leg, we also take the opportunity of having, by having this wild animal in our hands, to take a very close look at it. We use the straw to actually direct our breath, so that we disturb or move the feathers gently out of the way, so that we can actually take a look at what's going on the skin level. And then we're able to take a look also at the flight feathers of the bird. And by revealing that skin, we can actually look at the condition of the birds. The birds are scrutinized, and in this case, this bird has quite a healthy load of fat that it's put on prior to migrating, probably to Central America. So we thought we'd do this. We're going to show a quick video of the action at the table, and it's kind of unfortunate that because of COVID, we didn't invite, or it was difficult to have people come and go and actually be educated at the table. But so in lieu of that, we're gonna show this video to kind of let you know what it looks like. So this is, I'm going to throw it back to Paige, and is everybody able to see that then? That's good. So what I'm doing here, this is kind of a, we're taking a look at the bird, and it's, I believe, quite jumpy because we're kind of in a time lapse here, correct? And so as you saw, we're writing some data, and it gives you kind of a feel. And here I'm working with a slate colored junco, and we're being careful. Everything we do, we're trying to keep an eye on the bird's health, or actually its condition while it's in our care. And we want to write data accurately, because all this data, once again, goes to the Institute of Bird Populations and also to the what's called the Bird Banding Lab, an arm of the USGS, the U.S. Geological Survey. And they're going to have that data on hand for researchers to use in whatever form. Here I'm blowing on those feathers again just to reveal. And what I'm trying to do is we're trying to determine age, the age of the bird, and also, of course, the gender of the bird. We're looking many of these birds, and I probably failed to note this, but this MAPS work, this MAPS project, is actually a breeding bird project. In other words, it takes place only during the season where the birds are nesting and reproducing. So I'm going to share back to our original, let's see, yes, we're going to go to this right here. Very good, yes, everybody can see this, we're ready? Good, okay, excellent. And so, I'm going to move on, maybe. Perhaps, there we go. Okay, great. So here, just to give you an idea, and I'm going to ask my helpers here to give me a thumbs up if you can see this. I hope everybody can. Yes, excellent. So this is a close-up of a wing. This would be a view that the bander, the person banding at the table, would have of the bird in their hand. And to age these birds, sometimes you have to look very closely. I mean, you know, if you see bird feeders or birds that you're a bird feeder, pretty much they more or less all look the same, unless they've lost a feather or two somewhere along the line, or there are bird species that their plumage changes. But in this case, this black-throated blue warbler has what's called a molt limit, and right below the H where it says hatch year, BTBW, which is kind of a code that we use. I'm cluing you in, even though you haven't been at the banding table. I'm giving away secrets. The hatch year means that the bird was actually banded, or excuse me, hatched this year. The bird that we have in the hand probably is only weeks old. And the way I can tell that is there's a little green stripe on that feather right below the H in hatch year. And that tells me that there's been a break in the molt. And this black-throated blue warbler will have all kind of dark black feathers there next year when it returns from Central America. In this case, this Swainson's thrush has feathers that actually indicate an older bird. If you look at the tail feathers, especially the outer tail feathers, they look kind of like a trunk, like a club. They're kind of blunt instead of pointed. And that tells us that this bird has truncate, or and retrices is a fancy name for tail. And that means this bird is an after hatchery bird. So why do we want to know this? Well, we know that birds that are, well, I'll just tell you about this bird. And here we have a bird that, I'll just go back, maybe, yeah. This feather, or excuse me, this wing actually is a more complex mold, and it indicates a bird that's probably 2 years or more older, which is up to 3 or 4 years when we see this complex. And you can tell, looking at the wing, that there is newer feathers, older feathers, different color feathers. The reason we want to know this is because we want to know if birds are going to reproduce around the station. And that's really important for population ecologists to know. Are the birds reproducing? How well are they reproducing? And then how well are they surviving? And that's why this is a long-term study. The Institute for Bird Populations recommends that it runs in one area, such as Highlands Biological Station, for a minimum of 5 years, so that they can get a real feel for what's going on with the local bird populations. So here you can see that there's 2 different types of birds, and excuse me, let me just check on something here. It's really important that we understand like the entire life cycle of the bird, what the birds are doing in our care when we get a snapshot, or we kind of intersect their life. The bird on the right, the cardinal, that you all know from your feeders, it's a resident bird, but it was actually nesting when we actually handled it. So it's either sitting on a nest with young birds or sitting on a nest with eggs. And the bird on the left is displaying juvenile plumage. So this is a juvenile veery, a bird from South America that comes up here actually to nest, but this bird isn't nesting. This bird has those juvenile feathers, has spots that provide great camouflage for a young bird to be able to survive through its first 2 or 3 weeks or 2 or 3 months of life, which are very difficult for them. And so here,
I just want to let you know we can see your presenter view.
I'm sorry, what? Oh, I am.
We can see your presenter view.
You can right now? Okay, thank you so much for telling me. So should I go off of that? This will, I'll hide presenter view then. Okay, so I'm going to give you a quiz maybe you already know. Okay, so here's your quiz. You can send your answers into Winter or Paige. Is this bird an older bird or a younger bird? Is it a hatchery bird? Or is it an adult or an after hatchery, meaning at least 1 or 2 years old? Take a look at those feathers. And I'm sure you figured out it was a hatchery bird because, of course, and Paige will be grading your papers. We're sending in those answers. And I heard there was valuable prizes awarded, so make sure you're paying attention. So that's the view. Well, here's the numbers view from Highlands this year. Basically, we're looking through a keyhole right now at the population around Highlands. And again, this is data that's going to be sent into much larger data sets that resemble that for areas habitat that resembles our habitat around Highlands. So here we have, this year we handled 149 birds. We basically had 21 total species, and 8 of them were residents, but 13 were neotropical migrants, which is pretty cool. And 8 of them were warblers. And if we go back to that, if you think back to that blue and blocky graph that I showed you, warblers are very much in decline, especially neotropical. These are long distance migrants for the most part. And it's good data that we're collecting up here on warblers, 8 different species. We have 3 species of thrush and 2 sparrow species, which of course N means how many we actually collected there. And I threw the junco actually into that mix, which is kind of a sparrow-like bird. So you'll see birds such as this, which of course this is just some highlights from this year. And this is your second part of the quiz. And some of you may, you can send in your answers here for this hooded warbler. I need to know if I'm the bander, Is this, which one's a male and which one's a female? What do you think? Left female or right male or right left? I don't know. It's so confusing sometimes. Well, if you guessed left for female, I hope you did. So we know this because, as you know, like our state bird, North Carolina state bird, of course, we have a male cardinal that's much brighter and higher contrast, like the male on the right. And this bird travels quite far down into Central America for the winter. But this bird, the one that is the most abundant banded bird this year, up at Highlands, and it accounts for 11% of our total birds, is kind of a short distance migrant, although there are birds that travel quite long, as you can see from the range map on the left, all the way up into Alaska and all the way down into northern Mexico. The birds, though, in the southern Appalachians, as you can see, are pretty much residents in this area. So there may be some that hang around Highlands with bracelets on their legs. So keep your eyes open when you're hiking over there. And of course, we have a few, yes, we do. We do put little bands on hummingbirds. We only caught one this year, but hopefully I'm imploring the Nature Center to put up some feeders for next year, and maybe we'll have even some more feeders or more feeding hummingbirds. But with all the native planting over there, I'm sure there's plenty of hummingbirds, and we just happen to snag one of them in the nets. They are a handful. Okay, so I had to say that. All right. So with all this in mind, bird decline, what can we do? Well, we can take personal responsibility and action, of course, and there's Paige herself taking great data that we're going to be sending in to the Institute of Bird Populations. You can do personal things, small things that, if you're concerned with birds, you can come and volunteer with us, but you can also just clean your bird feeder. You can protect your windows, which are a huge problem for birds. Birds just haven't learned about windows yet. And this is a great time of year to learn about a Zen wind curtain, which is basically some strings hung in front of your windows, which is going to protect. So if you have a great view, it won't affect it very much. You can, yes, keep your cat indoors and your dog on a leash. This time of year, it's really important. There are a lot of birds that actually, like that junco that I showed you, it still is nesting on the ground in certain habitats, probably right around Highlands Biological Station. And dogs, as we know, are very curious. And cats, well, they are a big problem for wild birds. So I love that picture of that catio that the bird or the cat is enjoying there. And this is really important to do over the next 2 months, especially during the fall migration, because the birds that are moving through this area now are just newly hatched, especially ones that have never been to this habitat, like from the boreal forest, and they are moving through right now. You can use native plants. I mean, this is a big thing, and it'll promote birds and their welfare. Supplies more food. It gives cover, and transforming your yard from. I mean, who likes to mow? I know one person who does, but try to get rid of some of that grass and plant native plants. And that's just another thing that you can personally do. We're not going to dwell on this picture, but making wise consumer choices to reduce your waste is a big deal. And avoiding using pesticides. If you can get rid of some of that lawn, you're going to be doing that. Join, on a bigger scale, join the national and regional environmental organizations. I just listed 3 that I belong to, but there are myriads, and I'm sure you know that it is a good thing to join together with others to make things happen, to take action. Please educate yourself and others about the environment. And I love being involved with the foundation and with the station now that they have full-time people involved with education, especially education of the young. And of course, now it's really important in the next month to do your bit, vote if you can, and make sure you know what your candidates and what their environmental background is and what credibility they have towards respecting the environment. And lastly, please know that you do make a difference. Every little bit, everything we do makes a difference, and hopefully a positive difference for these birds. So I just wanted to let you know that it's a big project putting on or collecting good, careful data with wild animals. And to do it this year, it took many hands, many hands. I just want to thank especially Jason Love, Jim Costa, Pajak Polbrecht, and Winter Gary for that, and also the interns that were helping out at Highlands Biological Station, and everybody at the Highlands Biological Foundation also, and also the staff. So with that, one last video, and then we'll take questions. Paige, take it away. Yeah. That wood thrush is going down to central Mexico. Oh yeah. I think that's what it was.
Well,
Great.
thank you so much, Mark. I certainly enjoyed your presentation, and we already have some questions for you. So the first question is from one of our attendees who is asking a couple of questions about what it takes to be the bird bander, to be on your side of the table. And they're asking, what does it take to be legally allowed to band birds in the USA? Where can you be trained to do so? And how much does the entire process cost?
Well, it costs a lot of time. Most people learn either in their university are introduced to bird banding, marking birds in a university course. And then usually it's, if you're interested in, it lights a fire under you, you find someone to mentor under or to volunteer for. And that's how I got started. Other people like one of our primary banders at the station this year, Maya Perche, she was pictured in one of the pictures. She started as a bander as an undergraduate working with one of her advisors, and then took training courses. So that's another thing that I would do. So there are training courses offered. The Institute for Bird Population offers training courses. There are national organizations that regulate banding at a level for professionals. And then also, this is all regulated again by the federal government and the state government too. And how much does it cost? It really doesn't cost anything other than paying for some of the workshops and again, your time. The bands are supplied free again by your tax dollars, but there is small fees for licensing, like through the federal government and the state governments. That was a kind of a big fat question, but many different layers. But so if you're interested, yeah, find an organization to basically write data and do some observation, and then that's how we basically start people along the process, handling birds, and then moving on to the banding process. Yeah.
Awesome. We have a question about a bird that I don't think anybody has banded, if ever, but certainly not in a while. This attendee is curious about the Ivorybilled woodpecker and whether that would have lived up here in Highlands or could still be here.
As far as I know, I don't think it did, but you certainly, if you have an internet or if you're internet capable and you can Google Ivorybilled woodpecker, there'll be lots of writing. They were known to be denizens of lowland swamps, like, basically at sea level or a little bit higher, along the riparian or banks of very large, slow-moving rivers in the southeastern United States. Whether any flew or nested around here, I doubt it, as far as up in Highlands. Highlands being high, in the 4,000 foot range. So that altitude makes a big difference for the habitat. And those birds were relying on large trees with cavities that they could excavate and make their own because they're cavity nesters. Not that there weren't large trees up in Highlands, but again, they had a very restricted range, and then they were easy targets for hunters. So they're considered extinct now. I think officially, although maybe there are still some holdouts. There was a lot of effort and money spent chasing Ivorybilled, and I personally think there may have actually been one seen back in about 2005, I think, down in, I guess it was southern either Louisiana or, yeah, somewhere there, and then some others possibly, but I don't think there's any anymore. They're still holding out help for birds that may, there's a related woodpecker in Cuba.
Excellent. Well, this next question is about birds that we are finding here in Highlands. And Jeffrey Cantrell is asking, is seeing more neotropicals in Highlands indicative of anything in particular?
No, other than the habitat is good for neotropicals to nest in. And remember, they're only coming here to nest, and it only takes, they're only here for 3 to 4 months at the most. They arrive, most of these neotropical migrants, like on our list, worm-eating warblers, or that hooded warbler I showed you, but they're arriving sometime late April, mid to late April, and they're leaving now. They're staging, they're eating as much as they can to build up some fat to migrate. So what's indicative is that the habitat around Highlands supports forest dwelling birds, passers, songbirds that use that habitat. It's, Highlands, at least the surrounding area there, it's a pretty green area compared to some small towns. So that's what it's indicative of.
Well, we're certainly proud of that here at the Foundation and our mission to conserve this beautiful plateau. I did want to note we are past our expected half an hour time, but we have such good questions coming in that as long as Mark is willing to keep answering them, we're going to continue, and you will be able to find this later if you need to leave now. Because Cove Geary has another question, not about hummingbird feeders that you mentioned, but about recommendations for bird feeders that are safe from bears.
I don't know if they make one safe from bears, really. I think the people that I know that have bear issues, and that's most people I know in Asheville, or which is become a real bear city. With all the national forest habitat around, the bears are and they apparently are doing quite well. They're invading urban areas for easy food, and bird feeders are easy picking. So what I would recommend, at least what I've read, is take your bird feeders in at night. There's nobody feeding on them other than a possum, raccoon, or bear. And if you can do it, if you can have a bird feeder that is removable and you can bring it into your house and put it in a place that, let's say, small unwanted rodents wouldn't actually enjoy. Like at my house, usually there's some mice somewhere. And if I don't protect that bird feeder in the house, then it'll be found easily. So that's what I would recommend. Ooh.
That's fair. We have bird feeders here on the exterior part of the Nature Center that we've had to reconstruct how they're hung several times to discourage the bears from grabbing them. Right. Seems to have worked recently.
Great.
Kind of circling back to the migrants, Brock Hutchins is asking, have any of your birds banded here? And I think for here, we can define Western North Carolina, because his question is, have they been rediscovered in Central America? And of course, our birds banded this summer haven't had a chance to get down there.
Right. Hi, Brock. It's good to have a question like that. So that's the whole point of the MAPS studies. I mean, they're looking at the productivity of the birds here on let's say the Highlands Biological Station campus, but then we're also looking at how well those birds travel all the way to South America and come back. There's a expanded program called the MOSI program. If you go to the the Institute for Bird Population website. The MOSI program, and it's Spanish for something, but I don't have it in my head. But basically they have map stations in Central and South, Northern and South America where they're trying to recapture. But remember, we're dealing with many millions of birds, even though there are billions of birds that have disappeared. Many of these birds have populations in the tens of millions. And so the chances of these birds actually being captured with a little bracelet on their leg are very small. You know, the more well-funded and the more modern way to do it, of course, is to use small GPS tags on birds. And that's being done by North Carolina Audubon and National Audubon, and state Audubons and other researchers like at the University of Tennessee for birds like the golden winged warbler. And they're actually finding where these birds go, pinpointing their habitat locations in places like Northern Colombia in South America. And those forests are essential for overwintering health. And if the birds can't survive the winter, of course, they're not going to come back and visit us here in Highlands. So we're going to get data when and recapture these birds when they come back next, if they're lucky. And we are lucky, we catch those birds again. Usually our recapture rate for the map stations that we've been working is somewhere in the 20 to 25% range of the birds that we capture. So I hope that helps. If we can get more funding, we can work with fancier tags to understand where they go, but that's not the point of the map study actually. So it's not species specific, it's community based. It's a mark and recapture study for like a population of birds in your area, and then it's combined with other areas that are similar in elevation and habitat to produce this model of productivity and survivorship.
That ties into a question that I think some people might have on their minds, because what our viewers may not know, if they were out here, they would notice the mist nets are being put in the exact same place every time we have a banding station. So a question that I've thought while we were banding was, why don't the birds realize that stretch of road, so to speak, is problematic or is troublesome?
They do actually. So and so part of the, all of this data that we're collecting, it's all regulated by the Institute for Bird Populations and of course the federal government, but the IBP, they have really strict protocols down to like what color of ink to use on the data page. One of those protocols is that the nets are spaced in a certain, a minimum 75 meters apart, and they're put up and actually deployed only once every 10 days, more or less. So basically a minimum of 6 days between when a net is opened. So that is the minimum number of days they think, I guess, that let's say a hooded warbler would forget, oh yeah, there's no net there, and they blunder in. So they're running into these nets as they go about their business in the habitat. And it changes. Sometimes they can avoid the nets quite readily. And then other times after the, let's say the fledgling bird or the birds fledge out of the nest, these young birds, they haven't been told about the nets, and we catch a lot of young birds after they fledge, which is good because we want to know if they survive. That's part of the study.
Fantastic. It looks like we have one final Q&A. So if you have any questions, please make sure to send them to us. But this question comes from, okay, we have more. This person is asking about, should homeowners install bird houses to encourage population growth?
Yeah, so our little group, Blue Ridge Bird Observatory, it actually, that Carolina Kestrel Partners program, we actually supply, let's say, nest boxes, we call them nest boxes, for American kestrel. And of course, we're all familiar with, if you've been alive as long as I have, or if you see a bird nest box on a campus, let's say at Highlands or around the neighborhood, it's probably for bluebirds. So nest boxes have been used to promote productivity, but there's no guarantee that the birds that are produced there are going to actually survive. And that's one of the reasons, again, that we're studying in such detail and with such rigor and effort with the MAPS project. Your bluebird boxes, if you don't protect them from, let's say, snakes, it basically is a snake feeder. Snakes, in Highlands, there's probably less snakes than there are, let's say, down low where we band near Bryson City in North Carolina, down at 2,000 feet or lower. But there's predation pressure when birds are in a nest box like that and exposed. So the answer to the question is, yes, it increases productivity, but it doesn't guarantee that there's going to be recruitment or that those birds actually live long enough to actually be brought into the population to reproduce, because we have to be responsible for the bird nest boxes that we put up. If we don't clean them every year, if we don't protect them from easy prey, then we're basically, like I said, feeding predators for the most part. But sometimes you can't do it if you're doing it on scale. Like, I mean, the North Carolina Wildlife Commission does. They might have 100 boxes on the game lands, but not all of them are protected. So they do it kind of a shotgun approach where they, throw a lot of boxes out. They hope some of those birds survive. But in your yard, you should be very careful and take care of the nest boxes, please.
All right, and speaking of yards, we have somebody who is familiar with the station and the pavilion who's asking, are some species missed because of where mist nets are located? They're pretty sure there are goldfinches close to where we were previously banding nuthatches, and nuthatches as well, which I believe are not represented on our data.
Right. And so the data only represents the banding data. And so, and it was only 21 species, which most birders would just scoff at, like, oh, 21, I can see that when I'm eating lunch, and looking at my bird feeder. But those are birds that are marked, and we're actually, going to be studying those. That list will grow probably by 3 or 4 species over the next 5 years if we're working up there at Highlands. But we had a list of close to 40 species that we heard and saw, and yes, many of those birds never will get caught. For instance, I'd be surprised and really excited if we caught a red crossbill, and we heard red crossbills almost every day that we opened nets up there. But they were high in the trees. They worked, working on cones, conifers for feeding, and we're probably not going to be catching those. Cedar waxwings, we caught one just recently at another banding station, and we heard them every time we open nets, but they're, again, treetop dwellers. And some birds seem to be, I don't know, a little more aware. Maybe they have better eyesight or they're just more suspicious, but there are some birds that we catch very few of that are on our list. Like white-breasted nuthatches, you might think, oh yeah, you catch a lot of those, they're all over the place, but we seldom catch them.
All right, well, thank you so much, Mark, for presenting and for answering so many questions. I really appreciate it. I know that our attendees do as well. And speaking of attendees, thank you all for joining us. If you would like to support the foundation in future summers of bird banding here at the station, you can become a member or make a donation on our website. We appreciate your support, especially in these times. This is the last of our Zahner lectures for 2020, but recordings of our previous lectures are available on our YouTube page. And a recording of this webinar will be available by Monday, August 31st, if you want to come back and rewatch it. And if you're interested in our future programming, you can stay up to date by signing up for our e-blast on our website. For example, we're going to be hosting a virtual book club this fall all about Project Drawdown, which is focusing on the ways that we can mitigate our impact on climate change. More information is available on our website. So thank you all for a wonderful 2020 lecture series. I hope to see you in person or virtually for our next series in 2021. Take care.